So again, we will be recording the session today. All of you will be added to our Troche Center Canvas page. You'll be able to watch the session for the next 60 days, and then we'll remove it at that time. So however, I'm going to get started. So just to introduce myself, my name is Dr. Nadine Ventus. I am the program manager at the Troche Center for Entrepreneurship and Innovation. Welcome to our session today, Business Protocol, Business Etiquette 1.0. This is one in a three-part series on etiquette courses that are being offered by the Troche Center. In addition, all of you will be added to our Troche Center Canvas page where you can watch a recording of this session for the next 60 days. Just as a reminder for guidelines, please mute your microphones, please. You can have your camera on, but please mute your microphones. If you have any questions, feel free to type them in the chat box and I'll moderate the chat and ask questions at the end to Micah. But again, welcome to our session today. And let me down my honor to introduce Micah Meyer. Micah Meyer is a dual American and British citizen, is an entrepreneur, best-selling author of 2 etiquette books, and consultant specializing in international social and business training. Micah launched New York-based consultancy Beaumont Etiquette in 2013 and co-founded the Plaza Hotel Finishing Program with Beaumont Etiquette in 2016. In 2019, Micah co-founded the Beaumont Training Group to offer corporate training through modern and innovative courses, expanding her company's training offerings to topics including leadership, sales, customer service, ethics in business, and more. With a degree in communication, over 10 years experience in luxury, lifestyle, and fashion markets, Micah launched in both New York and London, focusing on integrated communications. A best-selling author, Micah has written 2 books on etiquette, Modern Etiquette Made Easy and Business Etiquette Made Easy, both published in 2020. I have them both. And an avid volunteer for charities, which promote confidence and teach both social and work skills in underprivileged communities. Micah resides in New York with her husband and daughter. So let me introduce and happy to honor Micah Meyer.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you. And it's so wonderful to be here with all of you today. And what I love about this is that we are, this is a 3-part series. So we're just going to be building on everything you learned today in the next sessions. And then like we just mentioned, dining will be a little bit different because that is so interactive. And we just want you to have all the question time that you can, or that you wish to have in that session. So one thing I just want to start out is, so no matter what you think of, when you think of the word etiquette, sometimes, and it's okay to admit this, sometimes we have a negative, there's like a stigma attached to that word etiquette, that it's only, used for fancy occasions, or only for the 1% of the world, or it's old fashioned, we just don't need it anymore. So that was one thing that when we started this company about 10 years ago now, that we set out to really change, because we want it to be modern, usable, practical information that you can start putting into use today. Like, for instance, did you know that there's one actual eye that you look into to become more likable, versus the other eye, which is when you want to come across more assertive and more authoritative? So think about, you're going into job interviews, you're going into roles where you need to show authority. So really, it's so much more than just which knife and fork to pick up, but we are going to cover that as well. So on that note, I'm just going to go ahead and share my screen so I can share my presentation with you all today. And at the end, we'll do a little question and answer. Let's see. Just going to, oh, I think I'm having a little trouble having access to the screen share function.
I see, do you see the bottom screen where it says
here we
share
go.
screen?
It just popped up.
Yep.
I think there's a delay on my end. Sorry.
Okay.
Here it is. Perfect. All right.
Yep, we can see it.
That?
Yep.
Okay. Yay. Okay. Thank you. It was a slow motion roboting across my. Okay. So getting started. So this first slide is one that is pretty important, because it just kind of explains etiquette in a little bit of a different way, and kind of explains the difference between IQ and EQ. And the difference really is, IQ is something that is very, you're kind of born and grow up and you have an IQ, and that's something that you're almost labeled with, and it's really hard to change, right? Versus EQ is something, it's your emotional intelligence, and that you can change. And that, in my opinion, and according to a very prestigious Harvard Stanford study, says is more important than IQ. So their study says that really 85% of your success, particularly in the workplace, is based on your emotional intelligence, your EQ, and only 15% on the technical skill set or your IQ, which means you could be the smartest person in your group, in your room, in your, whatever it might be, but it doesn't matter if you are still lacking that emotional intelligence. So today we're going to work on emotional intelligence, which is etiquette. So really, etiquette should be used every day for all occasions. And at the end of the day, if you've ever questioned if etiquette is important or relevant, just remember, start thinking about etiquette like this. Etiquette is simply about showing respect to other people. That's all it is. Who introduces who, and how are you introduced? Did you know there's an actual way to put emails in an order to show respect to, say, 5 different people on the email? Who is most VIP? There's a way to show that. So when you're applying for your jobs, when you're talking to professors, I mean, there's so many different ways that this is relevant. So on that note, we're going to first start with first impressions, because one wonderful thing with the Beaumont training group that we get to do here in New York City, and also we travel the country working with corporates, doing virtual presentations, but we get to train some startups, amazing, now huge tech startups from San Francisco, little baby ones that are just getting off the ground, and also to Fortune 100 companies. And what we do is we go into these companies and we work with their HR teams, and we work with their development teams, and we find out what is important to these companies, and then we go in and we train their staff. So the great part about this is everything that we're going to teach you today really, in a large part, was information given to us that companies look for, that when you're interviewing, when you are sitting at a new position, ready to take on a new role, what they're looking for. So in terms of that first impression, I know some of you have never taken an etiquette course before, so we're just going to start right here because it's so important. So there's actually a Princeton study that says you have 7 seconds to make a first impression. Now there's another part of that Princeton study that says you actually have 1/10 of a second before that first impression starts being made. So let's think about that. When you first walk into the room, when you first show up on Zoom, whatever it might be, people are making a judgment about you. Now you might say, okay, Micah, but that's, judging a book essentially by its cover is so unfair. And I agree, but that's how the human brain works. So here's the good news. If we know how to control those first 7 seconds, then we have nothing to worry about. I would actually be more worried if we had 30 minutes to form a first impression. So I'm going to teach you what people actually look for in those first 7 seconds so you can learn how to master it and become a little bit of a social chameleon so that you're always going to be appealing to the group that you're working with or that you're interviewing with or the person or people in front of you. So starting here, you can kind of see in this image here, we've got a yoga instructor on the left, and we've got somebody who suddenly is a doctor. It just shows if that same person walked into your office and you were sitting up on the little bench waiting to be seen, and the person on the left walked in, you would definitely raise an eyebrow. It's the same person on the right who happens to be a doctor during the day, but during the night, it's her hobby. She loves to teach yoga, but it shows that she changes her appearance depending on how she wants to be acknowledged and how she wants to be treated. So I want you to always start thinking, dress for the position you want, not the one you are in, is the first part. And also dress the way you want to be addressed. This is so important. So think about that. Do you want to be considered the person in the hoodie and the ripped, pants that, people don't really pay much attention to? Or do you want to be the serious career person that commands authority when they walk into the room. So it's just one thing really to really think about. And then remember to organize and prepare yourself. But this means from the way you dress to even the things that you hold when you come in for an interview or when you are on Zoom for an interview or a meeting. So that means looking down at your notes pad that you're taking with you to meetings, looking at the pen that you have in your hand. Is it a really nice pen that is a metallic pen and professional, or is it a chewed Bic pen that you've had in your pocket for a year? These also are part of your first impression points that you make that people remember. So you could be dressed beautifully and then you pull out that spiral notebook that has the paper flying out of the sides, and then you lost that polish. So just make sure you're looking at your overall presentation before you walk into that room. And remember, social media. So first impressions not only are in person and on Zoom, but social media. So every single person here, your homework, and the only homework I'm going to give you, I promise, is to Google yourself. What comes up? This is so important. There was a very interesting Business Insider survey that says 65% of people now, the moment they hear or see your name, Google you. And that's not just professionally, that's socially. So what comes up first? I want you to go up to Google and I want you to hit news Google, which is the most up to date and current stories or articles or images that come up, and also image Google yourself, because that picture from your Twitter from 2007 might still be there, and you want to know that, and there are ways to get rid of these images as well if you're not happy with what pops up. So that's just a big one there. Often the number one thing for SEO purposes that comes up on the top of Google is social media. So be careful. If you are not public, or if you are not private, make yourself or consider, or if you are public, just make sure that you want your future boss or your grandmother to see what's on there. And I always like to say. Okay, so moving into greetings and introductions. These are all part of a first impression. So let's talk about the Hatch system of greetings. So this acronym is one from my book that I made up. If you Google it, only my face will pop up because it's just a trick that I help clients use to remember the 4 official ways to greet someone. And outside of this, there's no official formal way to greet someone. So it's handshake, air kiss, cheek kiss, and hug. We're also going to talk about pandemic greetings on the next slide because that's equally as important right now. But let's say post-pandemic, you are interviewing. I still think these are really good qualities to be aware of in education to have. So a handshake, when in doubt, you go for the handshake post-pandemic. You want to make sure it's always right hand to right hand. Web of my hand meets the web of your hand and at an angle. Now it's 2 pumps in business, 1, 2, versus 3 pumps socially, 1, 2, 3. Yes, I know that is actually, you might think, what? But that is actually correct business etiquette. So 1, 2, straight to the point. Now you might get the overshaker, right? That happens and you keep going and going, as long as it's not you, is what I want to make sure of. And if that happens, you obviously go with that person as long as they need to shake your hand, and then you would pull away your hand. But the other thing to make sure of is that your handshake is firm and assertive, not aggressive, not who can shake hardest. That's not the point. Now, then there's the air kiss and the cheek kiss. Here's the difference. Now, in New York, in Los Angeles, and countries around the world, and some cities in the United States and around the world, they often air kiss or even cheek kiss. So what is that? An air kiss is if you do anything socially or professionally. Professionally, you would never kiss anyone. You would always stick to the handshake. But let's say socially, someone came up to you and they gave you would be called an air kiss. That's when my lips don't touch your skin. That's what you do in public. So if you ever see some poor guy walking around a networking event with red lipstick on his cheek, that should never happen, because it's technically business networking. But that person shouldn't have put their lips on their cheek. A cheek kiss is only reserved for close friends, family, and children. Same thing with a hug. So always stick with that handshake as your first impression. I had years ago, I was working in London, and an intern came in, and he was Actually, interestingly, from Texas, and had Latin heritage. And he came in. I remember him, and he thought we had a bonding moment because we were both Americans living in London. And I remember him coming in and kissing me, and I was his interviewer, and thinking, okay, we have some things to work on. So you just never know. Okay, so let's talk about pandemic greetings. So right now, for the foreseeable future, if you are in person greeting someone, you want to go with this option, because right now, previously, the handshake is actually it's actually thousands of years old, right? So the handshake is something that people uh, did for years and years, originally historically, to show that they didn't have a weapon. So that's how old the handshake is. So it will make a comeback, I'm certain of it. But right now, to show respect, we actually don't offer a hand because we're being conscious of other people's health, really. So it is, if you are asked to wear a mask, or those are the rules or guidelines given to you, you should be wearing a mask, and you should also be going contactless. Now, when I say contactless, does that mean elbow bump is still appropriate? No, because there's still contact. So what I want you to remember is right now, so we used to teach people to cough and sneeze in their left hands because your right hand is what you shook with or opened doors with. So now during the pandemic, we're saying actually proper etiquette is chew, right? So that you're not getting germs on your hand. So then imagine if I cough or sneeze in my elbow, and then a minute later, someone elbow bumps me. That's why you want to go totally contactless. So two options that I can suggest for you are, when you're approaching someone, there is the grasp and greet, which is one option. It's just taking your hands, grasping them. So you're showing the person I'm not going to be shaking your hand, and then just putting kind of over your heart as you approach someone and say, I do want to make sure I'm keeping you extra safe. So I'm going contactless. So even verbalizing it while you're physically showing them that, if you see them coming towards you with that handshake. The other is a stop, drop, and nod. That is where you're walking up to someone, you stop with enough distance between you, at least 6 feet. You drop your hands behind your back, and then it's just a gentle nod. It's so lovely to meet you all. Thank you so much for coming today. And that way you are showing with your body language, and also perhaps verbally, that you are not intending to physically shake or touch hands or bodies in any way. That line down there at the bottom I included because people have a hard time coming up with, what do I say, Micah? What do I do? So I'm going handshake free to be extra careful. And that just shows that you don't think they have germs. You're not saying you have germs, don't touch me. You're actually showing compassion that you are taking care of them, to be extra careful. If you have more questions about that at the end, please do ask. Okay, so now introductions. This slide is so important because I cannot tell you the amount of people at the HR companies and banks and law firms, and I mean, you name it, we teach there. Companies that teach their employees this next thing. So when you are introducing anyone, you want to understand that the most VIP person's name comes first. Now, this is both socially and professionally. So you can use it at your next party, or you can use it in your next, networking event, or at school, or whatever it might be. So here's how it goes. You always say the most VIP person's name first, and then may I introduce Bob, let's say, who is the less important person. So if Bob's a fellow student and the guest of honor is there, then the guest of honor's name comes first, Bob's name comes last. It doesn't matter the gender. So previously, in kind of old fashioned etiquette, the female's name always came first. But in modern etiquette, we teach gender neutrally. So that means most VIP person, no matter if it's a male, female, any gender really, and then may I introduce. So also in social settings, now let's switch to social settings, men are introduced to women. So you might say, Bob, may I introduce, or excuse me, Jeanette would be the most VIP. So Jeanette, may I introduce Bob? So Bob is being introduced to Jeanette. And then juniors are introduced to seniors. So grandma, may I introduce little Susie? Would be another example. So always just program that into your head. Most VIP, may I introduce. Now, in business settings, remember, if anybody is the highest ranking person is that VIP person. So just one thing just to note, and a couple of other points on introductions and who's more VIP, because a lot of people do wonder about that. Okay, meeting etiquette. So, if you ever have a job interview, the correct time to arrive is about 10 minutes early. Now, you might think, oh, well, I'm going to get there 20 minutes early because I want to show I'm extra prepared, extra excited. But I tell you what, for somebody that takes a lot of meetings, and I've done a lot of interviews in my time, there's actually nothing more frustrating than having a 3 o'clock interview and having your appointment arrive at 2:30 because you're not ready, you weren't prepared for that. So it's actually it could be even a little annoying, not to that person that you have come to see, which is the last thing you want to do, right? So 10 minutes early, and that means you're checking in. So if there's a front desk, that means you're walking in to give your name, to get your badge, to head up the elevator 10 minutes early, so that you're sitting nicely and quietly in that chair. Now, remember, we don't walk in with our Starbucks coffee, even, anything like that. You don't want to walk in with anything that is considered garbage or trash that you will be leaving at the office of the person you're going to walk into. And remember, when you are walking into a room, how to enter a room. So there's an actual way that you do this, which is to never put your back to the people in the room. So sometimes you think, oh, okay, I walked through the door, and then you turn around and you close the door and then you face the room. But you're technically doing that incorrectly because you're putting your back to the room. So instead, I want you to walk in the room, you open the door, or you would knock first if the door is closed. You'd open, you walk through, and then you shut the door with your left hand so that you're never turning your back to the person in the room who is probably standing up at their desk or at the boardroom table to interview you or meet you. So one quick thing there, and you can practice that at home. It is a little tricky, but once you get the hang of it, it's very easy. Okay, so so basically think about the most VIP person in the room. That person usually walks into a room first, typically, and that person would also make sure that when they do walk into the room, that they get the seat of their choice. They get the seat of honor. So a lot of people sit either who are the most VIP at the heads of the table or in the very middle of the table. So be sure that you are waiting before you take a seat, or if you ever walk into a boardroom, you ask, where would you like me to sit? Because they might be putting on a presentation for you, and sitting on that side would block your view. So just be very conscious about that. A couple other things to be aware of is you want to avoid swiveling in a chair. So sometimes if you have a chair that spins, there's nothing more frustrating for someone to watch somebody just moving their body. Also shows anxiety and nervousness. So be careful there. Make sure that your cell phone is on do not disturb, vibrate. One little trick I want to show you all here is airplane mode. Airplane mode is your best friend when you are in meetings or anything like that, because a lot of times if there is an emergency alert, even for weather, in New York City, we get these all the time. So it doesn't matter if your phone's on vibrate or silent, you suddenly get that emergency alert. Or if people call multiple times, it usually breaks that that vibrate function. So just be very cautious of that. That's my go-to for meetings or presentations. And always, if somebody offers you a water or a drink in a meeting, always accept it. Here's why. It takes about 4 minutes for someone to acclimate to a new environment. So if you walk into someone's room, somebody's desk area, office, and they say, would you like a water? Micah, would you like a coffee or tea? Then you always say yes. Hopefully just to the water. If you really need a coffee, then fine. But coffee takes preparation sometimes. So you want to be careful how much work you put someone to. But yes, I would love a water. That way, by the time they go to get your water, you have time to acclimate. You have time to be on your best A game for those 4 minutes that you need to enjoy the space, understand the space, lay out all of your materials, make sure your collar is up, your sweater is pressed, whatever it is, so that you feel great when that person comes to sit back down in front of you. Okay, and also for the same for you, you want to make sure you offer that person a beverage if they've come to see you. Okay, looking professional online. So the biggest key here is to find a location or backdrop that has a backdrop that is just professional. I would rather less than more in terms of finding something that really just isn't very visually stimulating. The goal is not to have lots of distraction, dogs moving around or whatever it might be. I actually have, I'm teaching from home today, but sometimes if I'm not in my office and I am at home downstairs, I actually have and it's just from Amazon. It is just a curtain. It's an actual curtain, and you put it up and it looks just like a bookshelf. And it is, people ask me all the time about it or where I got this from. And I actually have a few of them depending on who I'm teaching. And it could be a messy kitchen behind me, but nobody knows that. It is just a very polished, easy. They're $19.99. And if you have trouble because you've got, kids or you sharing space, think about investing in something like that. That is just your go-to, and it's so easy, and I just really love that. Also, any kind of virtual backgrounds, there's so many virtual backgrounds now for options. So should you have your camera on or off? So always assume your camera is going to be on. So sometimes that's not the case, and you're not expected to be on. But I can't tell you how many meetings or trainings recently I've been on where people have said, okay, everybody, I can't see you, turn on your camera, which I'm not saying to you right now, please, don't worry. But that's happened, and people are panicked because somebody's in a robe, somebody didn't have a shirt on. So if you do, so always expect to be on camera, but also if you are hosting a meeting, you should tell people if you expect them to be on camera, which would be the polite thing to do so they don't have any rude awakenings. Make sure that you are either sitting in front of a window if you have that option, or you have light on your face. So right now I've actually got a window a little bit kind of maybe like 10 feet away from me, and I also have a light ring, so there you can get lots of amazing light rings. The best light ring, in case you're wondering, in my professional opinion, is an 18-inch light ring. Sometimes light rings that are too small, you can see the circles in the person's eyes. Again, I got mine from Amazon. It's an 18-inch. It works wonders. It's amazing, and it just really makes you look crisp and professional, and is very easy to use. It's probably my number one most purchased thing, best purchase of 2020, I would say. Okay, so the hand test. So this is the next part. I want you to take your hand and I want you to put it on top of your head. I want to make sure that you can see the palm of your head. If you're doing this and you can't see your fingers, that means you're probably a little too close to the camera. So go back, readjust yourself, or you could even readjust your screen so that you can see the palm of your hand. And that is the goal in terms of what you want to have in terms of where you are on the screen. Now, if you are too close like this, also, it's not necessarily the best thing. No matter how beautiful you are, it just doesn't look as professional. You want to have about chest height up to the palm test like that. And that's the goal. It's kind of almost the same for a LinkedIn photo. If you're ever taking a LinkedIn photo, that's another thing you want to be careful of. We give the same advice for photos on LinkedIn or professional photos. And just make sure when you are talking, so say you have an interview, say you have a meeting of any kind, and you are presenting. Sure, you might look down at your presentation and then look back up, but the key is that you're looking directly at the camera. So if I were talking like this, looking at my presentation the whole time, it doesn't feel as connected than if I am looking straight into my camera. So that's just one thing to note. Also, you want to get your camera of whatever, either your phone or your computer, as high enough to eye level as possible. So if it's too low or too high and you're looking up or down, it just doesn't look as smooth. So just to keep that one in mind there. Okay. And no eating during a Zoom meeting. That's very important. That's something that is just, it kind of hopefully goes without saying, but not always. I do see it a lot. Beverages, I have no problem with, because it could be a long meeting. You have your water, you have a coffee, but just no eating unless you're doing a working virtual lunch. Okay, so phone and conference call etiquette. The correct etiquette, if you want to be very professional, let's say you're expecting a call. Sometimes your first interview is a phone call. If that's the case, or just you're expecting a call that would be considered a business call, then just you could say good morning, good afternoon, good evening, or hello. Just to say hi is not as put together as one of the other options. So I like to say, good morning, this is Micah, how can I help you? Or if I'm picking up my office line, or you could even say, good morning, this is Micah speaking. That's another option that you could go with. But just hi or hello in an unfriendly tone. So you want to make sure if you're going with hello, it's a bit of a softer tone. If you are working for a company, just a standard kind of greeting is good morning, this is Sarah, or good morning, this is Sarah, how may I help you? And note that I'm saying, how may I help you? Not how can I help or how can I, how may I? The word may I is seen as the most formal question. So may I please, if you're for instance, at a restaurant ordering something, may I please order the chicken? How may I help you? Not can, just one thing there. And if you are in a conference call and there's a loud environment, it is a pandemic, people usually are very understanding. Just try to either excuse yourself or keep going, and hopefully that stops. If it's really something that you need to adjust, then you could say, please excuse me, and adjust the background or the camera or your ear pods if you need to. Okay, so let's come to cell phone etiquette. All right, so cell phone etiquette. This is something that is, it sounds obvious, but it's still something that we have to go over because we're so used to our cell phones. Sometimes we forget that they're with us or that there's an actual etiquette behind cell phones. So whenever you're in a meeting, at a meal of any sort, it's vibrate, silent, or airplane mode, especially with clients. If you are ever taking notes, let's say I'm taking notes on my phone right now, or my iPad, or whatever it might be, and you're with me and I'm talking to you, but I'm looking down as I type. You might think I'm on Facebook for all you know. So if you are taking notes on a virtual call or in person at a meeting or in a class, it's important to say, or just to let them know, I'm just going to be taking notes on my phone, but I am of course listening and fully present, is something you could say, just so they're not like, what is that person doing in that meeting? And then just remember and again, we'll go through much more extensive dining, but nothing goes on top of the dining table that's not a part of the meal. So no cell phones on the table, no sunglasses on the table. So just remember that little point there too, if you're having a working lunch or something like that. All right, let's talk about email etiquette, because this first one is really interesting. So who goes in the recipient line versus the CC line? CC means carbon copy. So really remember that whoever you're talking to, whoever you're addressing the email to, that's the name that goes in the recipient section of the email. So if I'm talking to Anne, and if I'm saying dear Anne, then Anne's email is what goes in the recipient section. If I'm CCing Anne's PA, her personal assistant, then that personal assistant's email goes in the CC section. And then I don't address Anne's PA. I only address the person in the recipient section. If I'm talking to both Anne and her PA, then both of them go in the recipient section. Dear Anne and Sam. And that means both of their emails go up. That's a big mistake we often see. And remember, whoever is the most VIP person, their email comes first. And also, when you're addressing the email, their name comes first. So if Anne is the president of the company, Anne's email comes first, and then dear Anne and Jack, for instance. And then Jack's name comes second, which means he is less senior than Anne. So just one thing there to know, if you are, for instance, emailing the president and vice president of a company, a lot of people know this. And when you don't go in the right order, people who know this rule can be offended. So I just want to make sure everybody knows that. It's a good business etiquette skill to have.
Mike, quick question. What if you're emailing two people who have very senior roles, or they're both vice president of different, they have equal roles, like vice president of marketing versus vice president of, how would you then navigate that?
So I would then, the go-to usually is if there's been a person who's been there longer or has been in the role longer, then that person takes precedence. If they're both the same playing field, same everything, there's a male and a female, I would put the female, then the male. And if not, then it doesn't, then alphabetical. It's really, yeah, it really can vary. But I always say, for instance, if there's in our diplomatic protocol classes, if we're introducing two presidents who've both been their prime ministers, who've both been in office for the same amount of time, or that are both, excuse me, in the same role, but one has been there for a year longer, then that prime minister takes precedence over the other. Okay, so when you are emailing, just make sure, so after 3 short paragraphs, people lose interest in emails. So this is something that was revealed in a study. So that means after 3 short paragraphs, people are only starting to scan your emails. So if you have a lot of information, consider bullets, because then people will skip to the bullets and scan the bullets. But remember that. So I always like to write my emails and then go back and take things out of the email that are less important, because I know people are going to start scanning. Remember to type out any acronyms. So ASAP is probably one of the biggest offenders. I will have this to you ASAP, and it looks like you're yelling. So instead, you just want to write it out as soon as possible, so there's no tone mistaking. Also, if you are using the and sign, right? Instead, I want you to spell it out, AND, for the most formal type of business etiquette emails. Every email, for the most part, should have a next step or a follow-up, a point. What's next in the email? Why are you emailing? Should something be due in a certain amount of time? Will you be following up? Do you want them to follow up? Are you looking forward to hearing from them? So make sure you have that follow-up. And a good draft of a subject really should be the most recommended is 6 words or less. Because after 6 words, often you could even be sent to spam if it gets too wordy. So that's one thing to remember there. And proper salutations, the most formal way to address an email. I'm talking about the first time you're talking to somebody, or one of the first times, or somebody who you really want to show respect to. It's dear in the person's name. And if you would like, if that's too formal for you, you could say good morning, comma, good afternoon, or good evening. That's another option. I use that a lot as well. And then your proper closing for an email, the most formal in business etiquette is best regards, comma, not thanks, comma. Never thanks, comma, actually, for formal business etiquette. So you could use warmest regards, kind regards, with regards. You can find your own personality and put that in there, but those are the most formal sign-offs. And of course, make sure when you're attaching files, images, anything like that, you want to make sure that you are making sure they're professionally labeled. A couple of email etiquette don'ts, and you might have done this today and are thinking, oh my goodness, I had no idea. But do not use these in your emails as discussed. Why? Because it almost sounds, an email, again, tone is hard to read. It almost sounds a little condescending, like, as discussed, have this on my desk by da 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 da. And instead, it just, you could say, in regards to points A and B, I'm da 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 da. But as discussed in a few years ago, was revealed to be one of the most frustrating email phrases. So I love that. I always remembered it. No problem is a problem. Micah, can you please have this on my desk by 3 o'clock? No problem. Well, I could have meant it as no problem, or I could have meant it as no problem. The person on the other end can't hear my tone, so be careful. And we know how to start an email now. Don't ever forward anyone's email unless they know you are forwarding it. That's really, really important. No email emojis, sadly, in professionalism, in terms of professionalism. So lots of little smiley faces. I'm a big emoji person. If you text me, you'll probably get 30 hearts or more emojis back. But when it comes to professionalism, I don't use any emojis because they're seen as not professional. And be careful of capitalization and exclamation marks. I have to go through and take out exclamation points of my emails often. And then texting etiquette. So here's just a few things. I think professionally, I avoid texting unless it's somebody who's on my team, in my group, in my, study group, whatever it might be. In terms of that first impression, I would never text my boss unless my boss texted me first, probably. But remember, 9 a.m. to 6 p.m. are traditional working hours. So sending a text to your colleague or your boss at 9:30 p.m. is not appropriate unless they text you first and request, or it's obvious that they expect a request back. And it's because they're the VIP. So they kind of make the rules if that's the case. And just remember, it's very important to just still remember, sometimes people are too casual in their texting, but if it is a work or a school thing, remember that's still considered professional etiquette and you want to follow the same rules. If you wouldn't want your grandmother or your future boss to see it, you do not text it. And showing respect and consideration. So if you are walking through a door and you want to show respect to somebody else, who walks through the door first? It's the same as the introductions. It's the same as the emails. Whoever you want to show respect to, that person walks in first. Same thing with an elevator. You're walking to an elevator. You hold the door for the person you want to show respect to. And you can just say, please, after you. In business etiquette, we no longer use the phrase ladies first. Why? Because you don't want to point out gender. There's no point. People, in business etiquette, you're not pointing out, I'm opening a door for you because you are of your gender. You're saying it's just because I respect you. So in business etiquette, there's a really interesting case study recently at a very large Fortune 100 where somebody lost their job because they continued to point out their colleague's gender and what used to be really innocent ways. So just something to be conscious of. Okay. So what time, when is late? What do you do if you're running late? We're all human. It happens. So remember this, if you're running late to a conference call, a Zoom call, an in-person meeting, for every minute you think you're going to be late, you should give 2 minutes notice. So if you think you're going to be running 5 minutes late, then you give 10 minutes notice. And this is important so that person's not on the phone listening to the elevator music while you wait. And then that pop-up comes, sorry, running 10 minutes late, running 5 minutes late, running whatever. And then they're already on the call. So it's considered a lack of respect for the other person's time. And so thank you emails. I don't believe it's ever, for the most part, especially in business, ever appropriate to send a text saying thank you. At least do an email. An email is a little bit more formal. I believe, is it appropriate to send an email? Thank you. Absolutely. So you typically you match what you're thinking with what you're thinking for. So if it's something that I'm thanking somebody for an amazing dinner, a client took me out to a fabulous dinner and I want to show a lot of gratitude, I will send a handwritten thank you note. If somebody just did a really nice thing for me, made a nice introduction by email, then a nice email thank you is absolutely fine. But I do think everyone in here should have should have stationery, tangible stationery, so you can write handwritten thank you notes. There's nothing more impressive than after an interview or a meeting or something that really was impressionable or beneficial to you, and you receive that handwritten thank you note, you don't forget it. So if two people are being decided upon and there's two people in one role, who gets the role? If they're both the same playing field, the person that put the extra effort into sending that handwritten thank you note. And one thing about a thank you note, I wrote this in my book too, but I don't recommend starting a thank you letter or email with thank you. So you might think, what? So if you are thanking somebody for something, they see that thank you and then they just know what you're talking about. So instead, you start the email or the thank you letter with something emotive. So, walking into your office, I felt a complete sense of inspiration and awe at your company. Then, thank you so kindly for inviting me in for an interview, whatever it might be, rather than thank you for the interview. It's just a little bit more impressionable. Okay, so voice and sophisticated verbiage. This is something that really is very important, especially on Zoom, on phone calls, in person. If you're presenting, eventually you probably all will be asked at one point or another in your career to present something. Make sure you articulate and enunciate everything. We teach courses here at Beaumont Etiquette where the whole entire presentation is just your voice and how to present and how to sound more clear and concise. But half the battle is enunciating and articulating everything. So another tip there, 3 Ps. Every single person has something to work on with their voice. Unless you're a professional TED Talk presenter, it's pitch, pace, and pause. So as I'm describing them, I want you to pick which one you think you are. Pitch is the most common to work on. This is, do you speak with a monotone voice and then expect that nobody is interested and you're not sure why? Or do you go up at the end of your sentences or trail off at the end of your sentences? That's pitch. That's something you can easily work on. Pace, too slow or too fast, and pause. Do you need to pause after you speak to let people think about what you're saying? Or do you ask them a question and then keep talking over them and they don't even have time to think about it? So mine is pace. I constantly have to slow myself down. So just think about which one you are. I recommend Toastmasters online. Toastmasters has some free, amazing tools to help you address all 3 of those P's that I think are really, really helpful there. And really, just remember that to have maximum engagement in your voice, you want 2 points of inflection in every sentence to show maximum engagement. So, yes, I would love the opportunity to interview at ABC Company. All right, moving on. So, just I told you in the beginning that there's an actual I to look into, and you want to come across likable versus more authoritative. So, which I is it? And now, technically, it doesn't work for Zoom. So, this is just in person, but I know you're all going to be doing lots of in person meetings soon. So, remember this: when you want to come across more likable, when you're first talking to someone, you want to look into their left eye. Their left eye. Why? It's not the left and the right hemisphere of the brain working differently. What's happening is it's unnatural for us as humans to look into the other person's left eye. So when we do that, we lean into them and we show compassion and likability by doing that. It's a body language secret. So I'm leaning into you. Yes, I'm Micah Meyer from Sarasota, Florida. And then when I want to come across more authoritative, then I switch eyes. By switching eyes, I square my shoulders and then I become more authoritative. I take on a more authoritative stance. It's comfortable for us as humans to look into that right eye. So we take on that stance. So it's left eye likable, right eye, I mean business. So just one little trick, a little hack there, body language hack you can practice. And then the mirror technique, all this means is if somebody's leaning into you, then lean back. If somebody is kind of really stretching back, then you want to make sure you are not leaning in because they're kind of needing more space. So people tend to like to work with and speak to people that are most like them, that they can relate most to. So that's what the mirror technique is all about. If I go to a law firm where I know it's a corporate law firm, I will dress in a corporate suit because I know everyone there will be dressed that way because people like and can relate to people that are like them. So versus when I'm at the Plaza Hotel and I have a feather boa on and I'm teaching a tea etiquette class. So that's the difference. Okay. And a couple of just sitting suggestions for you all to end on here, and then we're going to open up to any questions you might have. So there are really, I like to say, and I mentioned it before, I like to teach gender neutrally. Generally, I think that's the future of modern etiquette. Years ago, like I said, the stereotypes I talked about earlier, people would say it's only for wealthy people, it's only for fancy occasions. That couldn't be far enough from the truth. All of these things that you're learning today are about showing respect. Now, posture, sitting up straight, rolling your shoulders back, having your chin parallel to the floor, making eye contact, making people feel good when you meet them, and confident. This is, remember, emotional intelligence. But so why is, for instance, posture important? because posture shows you and shows the other people around you that you're talking to that you're attentive, that you're alert, that you want to be here, that you are paying attention. So interestingly, when you walk into that interview and someone asks you to sit down, you take the seat. And remember, again, never just sit. Make sure somebody invites you to, and please have a seat, Micah. And then I take my seat. Then if there are armrests, be careful not to use them unless it's a really long interview, because the moment you use armrests, you begin to slouch. Slowly over time, you get more comfortable and you slouch a little bit. So just be cautious that you remain with your good posture. Posture is for sitting, standing, walking, going up and down staircases. It doesn't matter. Posture just shows that you are attentive and alert, and it shows respect to the other person. So I'm not doing this, sitting there, or even leaning forward or leaning or slouching. People get really frustrated by that sometimes. So sitting, one of the only things that I teach difference in genders, and I let people choose what is most comfortable for them, is for anatomical reasons. I teach sitting etiquette a little bit differently, and because for anatomical reasons, not everyone can sit in certain ways. So two options on the left, and that was me. Those are images from one of my books. So on the left and the middle photo, you can see that the knees and the ankles are together. So if you are, sitting in a way that is not comfortable, I never want that for you. Worst case scenario, just if it doesn't matter your gender, keep your knees and your ankles together and feet flat on the floor. And that is a sure way to always look polished, and it doesn't matter. That's one go-to that's pretty comfortable for everyone, especially if you're more petite. But these are two options on the left. I just want to point out on the right. So this is a gentleman's sitting pose. Now, if you see the bottom of his shoe is facing down. So that's the key. If you're crossing at your knee there, the bottom of your shoe shouldn't be facing out, because on his way up to that meeting, he could have stepped in fluorescent green gum. And now that's all I see, rather than his beautifully polished shoe. So that's just an example there to show you how it does really matter at the end of the day in terms of your sitting. So those are just a couple options for you all to see there. And on that note, I know that is a lot of information. One thing that I really want everyone to focus on is, remember, you are a walking, living, breathing brand. You are a billboard. So when you go to the store, when you go to school, when you go to your interview, when you come home from your interview, so whenever you are leaving the home at all, remember that people, you're telling people how to address you. You're telling people what to think about you. You're telling people about your style. You're telling people about your personality. So just remember that you're a walking, living, breathing billboard at all times. So especially as you put together your professional persona, just think about that. And try to come up with, and it's not ever too late. I never think, everyone says you only have one opportunity to make a first impression. And I don't necessarily believe that. I believe every day is a new opportunity to make a first impression. So the next Zoom call you go on, fix the things that you think, oh gosh, I could do better here. I could have a better impression here. The next time you go to an in-person meeting, maybe you've never looked like that before, and people notice, but it's a good thing. Just say, thank you. I appreciate that. And then change the subject. So every day is another opportunity to make a first impression. And on that note, I wanted to, those are of course my two books, the business etiquette one on the left, and then the yellow one, social etiquette. And again, they're both for both genders. And so I wanted to just open up to any questions. I know we have the chat function available. If there's anything you want to talk about, Micah, go over that slide again. Anything at all, your most burning etiquette questions, I'm here to answer. Should I just...
Oh, yeah, actually, Micah, thank you so much, Micah, for a wonderful presentation, a thorough presentation. There are a few questions that I've been curating in the chat. The first one is from Annie, who's asking, is there such thing as overly formal, or can it be seen as respectful?
Yes, there is such a thing as overly formal. So, what I want you to pay attention to here. So, remember, etiquette's all about emotional intelligence. So, if it doesn't feel right, don't do it. If you feel like you're being too formal and somebody is just, and you're applying to a job or speaking to somebody who you know is so informal, you're applying to a company for a job and you've gone to the website and it's an internet marketing company and everybody you can see wears, Facebook style hoodies and, jeans and everybody's informal. I do not think you should go into that interview in a two-piece suit. I think your email, same thing, your conversation skills, definitely. I think you do have to adjust. These are just guidelines for you to adjust to when and where you need to be. For instance, another example, if you're writing an email and you say, "Dear Sarah," and then Sarah writes back, "Hi, Micah," then the next email I'll probably not make as formal because I can tell Sarah's a little informal. And so those are, it would actually be a little strange if 4 emails in, you started every single one with "Dear Sarah" after she's very informal with me. So definitely you want to make sure that you're always thinking about what would be most comfortable for the other person first. But when in doubt, always go more conservative, always go more formal, more respectful, because you could always scale down rather than starting a first impression off as too informal.
Thank you. Next one is, when addressing more VIP people in the email, is it all right to address them by their first name?
Okay, so in the first, I think it is industry dependent. If I'm reaching out to somebody for the first time and, either a new client or even for Beaumont Etiquette, my company, if somebody's writing into us for an inquiry about a course, then typically the response from, my team would be, "Dear Mr. Smith," in response. And because we don't know that person. So we always go a little bit more formal. However, if the person writes us and is like, "Thanks, Sarah," then we might say, "Good morning, Sarah," because Sarah's given us permission. She signed her name as Sarah. So then, we adjust. So if I'm reaching out to someone for the first time, then I will write, and I don't, I've never spoken to them. They haven't signed their name as Frank in return, or Frank, or whatever it might be. Then I will say, "Dear Mr. Rogers," and not "Dear Frank," if that makes sense. But then once Frank writes back, then I'm fine to adjust.
And do you recommend as you follow up to that question? So if I email someone, I say "Dear Doctor," I work with a lot of faculty and professors, I put "Dear Doctor" or Professor O'Toole, and they sign their name, when they email back saying thanks and their first name. Even though I like the formality, I should then email them back with their first name, even though I would prefer to say.
No, I would not. So if somebody says, if you say "Dear Dr. Frank" or "Dear Dr. Rogers," and then Dr. Rogers signs Frank,
Mhm.
then I won't say again, "Dear Dr.
Yeah.
Rogers." I'll just say "Good morning," or, "I really appreciate your response." I won't ever call him Frank unless on the phone or in person he says, "Please call me Frank." Because just because he signed his name Frank doesn't mean he gave you permission to
To
drop
call them.
the formal. Yes, if that makes sense. Sorry if that wasn't clear. Yeah.
A few more questions. Is there a recommended way for women and men to sit on a chair?
Yes. So going back to this one, this would be that might have come through that question before this slide. I'm not sure. But worst case scenario again. Another point on this, and sitting in a chair, a bench, seat, anything like that. So you never actually want to rest your back into the chair. You actually want about an egg's width distance, or think about a golf ball distance from your tailbone to the back of the chair at all times. Because again, it's just like the armrest. The moment you lean back into the chair, relax. So if you have that egg's width or golf ball distance in between your back and the back of the chair, then you always have to sit up straight. So it's almost like forcing posture. But that's one trick too, when it comes to chair sitting. And I do little, I have more examples. If these two are not comfortable for you, reach out to the team and say, "Okay, I tried these don't work." And in the next session, we can introduce some more sitting poses for you if that's of interest.
And so email where you receive this link, the entrepreneurship email. If there's any follow-up questions that you'd like to see in the next session, let us know. You can reply back to the entrepreneurship email. We receive this Zoom link. Next question is, When you're looking into their left eye, are you also positioned leaning towards the left side, or are you just looking into their left eye?
Yes, you are actually positioning your body. So you're actually leaning in toward their left eye as well. So it's a you're looking into the left eye, and then your body is heading toward the left, their left shoulder as well. Yeah, that's a great question.
So two more questions. Are business cards needed on interviews?
Okay, so I'm a big believer. I really like business cards, and here's why. It leaves somebody with that tangible something. And a lot of people are just dumping business cards. That's happening a lot now, but I still am a big believer in them. It also makes people remember you. They'll find that business card a week or a day later, a month later. I keep every business card I think I've ever received in the last 3 years. I still have. I do go through probably once a year and weed out any ones that I don't use, but and I cannot tell you the amount of times where I've thought, what was that person? Oh, that one company. And I've gone through and I found the person. So I'm a big believer. If you do not have a company yet, what I would recommend is actually called a calling card, which is a business card. You can have them. I really like moo.com is where we actually we don't work with them professionally. That's where we get ours from, because you can really customize it. And a calling card is essentially your name, your email, maybe your social handle, if that's your company or whatever it might be, and maybe your website, your email, whatever it is. It's not necessarily, or if you don't have a company yet, it's just your name, your email, your phone number. And that is something that you can do. It's still then you're giving something. It can be very awkward if people are exchanging business cards and you don't have anything to give and you're like, oh, sorry, I don't have one. That always feels a little awkward to me. So if you can make one, I think it's a really good option to have for networking purposes as well.
Thank you so much. And the last question is, when should you send a thank you card or email? After how long the event happened?
So my personal general rule of thumb is kind of within business days of whatever you're thanking someone for. That's when it should go out. So if you had an interview, you could I think if you have an interview, what I like to do is um, I like to send out the thank you letter same day, so it arrives like next day. I think that's really impressive. If the thank you letter is going to take a few days to get there, I think an email thank you and a handwritten thank you for an interview is it's not overdoing it. I think you just have to say different things in it. But if you're thanking someone for a gift, if you're thanking someone for a dinner party, a lunch, then within 3 business days, that physical thank you letter should go out so that it arrives hopefully within like the week. So it's not, so it's somewhat timely from what you're thanking for.
Oh, to start, one more question.
Sure.
How can we ensure our photos do not appear, or how can we ensure our photos do not appear in Google Images or anywhere on the web for that matter? How can we ensure that our name does not open other people's, and how can we ensure that our name does not open other people's Google Images?
Oh, okay. So, that is something I'm probably not the best person to speak on that topic. I can only tell you my secret to that, but there are companies that actually specialize in this. I had a client who he actually hired a company, an SEO company is what you would Google, SEO image companies, and they can what they do essentially is they either remove tags or contact companies or social media to remove whatever tags. So that's not what's coming up. Or say you have the same common name as 1,000 other people, and when you Google it, their LinkedIn comes up and not yours, then I would recommend putting your middle initial. So Micah V. Meyer, and put that on my resume, put that on my website, and make that my signature. Because if there's 30 other Micah Myers, then how do they ever find me? So always add that signature point, which is your middle initial if you have one. Another thing that you can do is create, if you want something to go away and maybe somebody else had an image of you, contact them, reach out to them, ask them to take it off their Facebook page. There are also companies that specialize in getting articles removed about you. That's something that's a real issue for a lot of people. One thing, if you don't like what comes up when you image Google or news Google, then what you need to do is find SEO, or basically get another article written that ranks higher than whatever is currently listed. So for instance, when I first, if there was a bad review of your company in an article or something like that, then try to get three other positive articles written that will outrank because of SEO purposes. I mean, there are whole companies that specialize in doing this for people, but that's just a couple little points there. But you want to make sure, you just want to know what happens, what's out there when people Google you. And it can be a tricky thing, but because so many people have an issue, there are entire companies and industries dedicated to this very topic. So while I don't specialize in that, those are just a couple tips that you could maybe look through.
Thank you so much, Micah. This has been an amazing session. And I hope to see all the students back. So our next session with Micah is going to be on Thursday, April the 8th at 12 p.m. at the same time as 12 p.m. Pacific, the Business Etiquette 2.0. If there's any topics you want Micah to talk about more that you learned here in Business Pro 2.0, please email the entrepreneurship, reply to the email you got with this Zoom link, and we're happy to add that. But again, thank you so much, Micah, for joining us today. It was an amazing session. And for all the students, we'll be adding this session to the Trosh Canvas page. You'll be added to that page. And by the end of this week, the session will be up, and it'll be up for 60 days only, and then we'll be removing it. Thank you so much for joining us today. And again, Micah, thank you for your amazing session.
Thank you all so much. I'll see you next time.
Thank you. Bye-bye.